Hello, everyone. I know it's been a while. It's been over 6 months, I think. I did intend to make a video in between here and there, but I got so lost in editing that I never got around to finishing it. Apologies for that. So, I've been getting somewhat blackpilled recently. Not by any particular circumstance, but an amalgam of circumstances. So before I go into this, will say some disclaimers. My first is, this is all my opinion, and I welcome correction or opposing opinions, especially if it helps me out of this mindset and maybe gives me a solution. Second, I've not given up entirely or anything, but the way I'm beginning to see it, it's a lot more difficult to find a reason to stay engaged. Now, to be blunt, it seems to me that if the purpose of changing and improving our society is for future generations, then nothing that we do is worthwhile. Particularly not if our idea of improving society is to keep those in power accountable and our government small. Due to human nature, we have tendency to form societies. And due to the increasing complexity of societies, hierarchies naturally form, with typically a small contingent of individuals who oversee and manage the systems and infrastructure of our society. This occurs in every group of individuals, and is not inherently a bad thing, though the power that follows from such a role is attractive to a certain aspect of human nature. As far as I understand it, all humans naturally gain chemical rewards for maintaining or raising their status in human society. As such, individuals are naturally incentivized to raise their position in society in many different ways. One of these ways is through power, with politicians, religious leaders, celebrities, experts, and so on. Some might get themselves even in charge of a small local committee. But power is a corrupting influence. Due to the biological rewards reaped from holding it, individuals will do a great deal to maintain and grow that power if left unchecked. That's where elected officials and accountability come in. Democracy is a system that has been developed over centuries to deal with some of the issues. Where other systems would often result in unaccountable rulers, often replaced only through violent coups or revolutions, democracy creates a stable and controlled eternal war. By creating a non-violent avenue for power, reached only by serving the people, democracy ensures the actions of those in power typically work in favor of the people, and also ensures that when it doesn't result in violent revolution. Now, it is my belief that small government is the only way this system works effectively. However, I've also come to believe that the state is only ever moving in one direction, under normal circumstances, and that is in the direction of greater government power and control. In addition to that, I've come to feel that no government remains accountable or small. While I cannot speak to those in power in the past, it does appear that a mindset forms amongst those who achieve power, especially on a grand scale. A mindset of benevolent moral superiority, that those in power know better than the simple plebeian. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, and those who lead have followers, and will ultimately fall into the pit of believing that the nature of having followers is due to their own power and ability. Like fiat currency, they fail to see that the value is only given to them by those who believe in their value. Unfortunately, it matters not, because once they begin to believe the lie of their own inflated ability and fallibility, they begin to exert their will under the false righteousness of their conscience. Those in power may have the best intentions. We all have the tendency to rationalize our actions and find justifications for almost everything we do. Thus, we end up with elected officials enacting legislation and creating systems to shoehorn society into being the way they envision it. These systems, having the same fallibility as their creators, ultimately fail. The bigger and grander they are, the more damage they do. Now, this is not to say that there are none who seek power who would undo the damage done by such leaders, but unfortunately, they rarely gain power. It appears that those who are usually elected are the ones who promise to fix the most problems and do the most with the situation, even if it is beyond their remit. Now, that answers my reasons as to why the government grows in size. Now, as to why the government will ultimately become unaccountable. Initially, when there is little to be done with the power wielded, the system can work fairly well. However, over decades in very small increments, the government slowly finds more problems to fix. As those problems get fixed, the government grows in power and size. The NHS and job seeker benefits was born out of the 1911 National Insurance Act. Initially starting as a fund managed by many different approved societies, eventually government control expanded, slowly absorbing the societies, until in 1946, when the National Insurance Act was expanded and created the National Health Service, and made the approved societies redundant, and the whole system entirely under government control. The same goes for taxes and regulations. It's a very rare sight for any taxes or regulations to be repealed or decreased. Of course, the reason for this is because as the government finds more and more problems to fix, they require more and more financing. And this is not helped by the absolutely abhorrent levels of inefficiency and mismanagement, primarily caused by the unaccountability, but we'll get back to that. So, when ultimately the government has grown to have its domain cover nearly every aspect of business and society, the corruption occurs. An individual who runs a business, has grand aspirations, might see that government controls on the industry are a useless hindrance. They often are. But this individual might try to convince a politician to make some exceptions, or offer to assist a politician in getting elected in exchange for assistance in changing some laws. We're all familiar with crony capitalism. Though I tend not to see powerful individuals in business or politics as nefarious or malicious in their actions, though I suspect on the ground it makes no difference. Now I've thought to myself, what happens if a particular group, say a political party, consistently works with large corporations? Ultimately, they would amass wealth and power. This wealth and power would allow them to dominate the political sphere through grand campaigns and advertising that overshadows any opposition. This wealth and power would ensure that the only parties dominant enough to achieve power would be the ones who would continue to exert their influence over society. And the vast majority of the electorate will only ever have the option of the most powerful parties, who will all be in favour of more government. So, those elected will primarily always be those who are not necessarily the most competent or ideal to lead, but those who will do the most for those who put them in power. So government will always grow to cover near all of society, but I need to go more into why they'll become unaccountable. It's in part answered by the previous point. A large and powerful political party can exert their influence to protect themselves and their vision of an ideal society, and that contributes to make them unaccountable. But there are other reasons why those in power will ultimately end up unaccountable though. Firstly, human nature, again. Human nature has a tendency towards tribalism. Some people will vote for the side their parents or community vote for. Some vote based on a particular worldview, and others fall into cults of personality, or a mixture of all of them. No matter what the reason, there's a strong tendency for people to join a tribe, after which cognitive biases and preference mean they're much more forgiving of their own side and much more damning of the others. What they regard as true or morally right is often heavily influenced by their tribe. There is also ideology. Political ideologies, in addition to religions, set up a worldview under which a group of people unite in common interest, which then becomes cultures and communities. Typically, a tribe is a mixture of all of these, but often separate into varying differences, much like how different religious denominations form, despite sharing largely the same worldview. These political ideologies become like the tribes I mentioned previously. As a quick aside though, political ideologies can also corrupt the conscience of those in power. This is another explanation for why some leaders can make very immoral decisions. We're all too aware of the actions condoned by some of the most extreme ideologies and religions. Of course, for those who are not deeply invested in a particular ideology, the truth is usually not difficult to find. But unfortunately, the average person does not have the time to research and explore the details. Usually people tend to adopt a set of sources. It can be their community, news media, various organizations, popular individuals, and so on. But the vast majority of people appear to use the traditional media as their source of information. Historically, this appeared to be adequate. However, in recent decades, we've run into a mixture of issues in which most media sources are no longer reliable sources of information. The first is the same as that which affects all individuals. The traditional media, and even those who amass a large following online, fall victim to the same egotistical flaws we're all likely to fall into when given a large following. I've seen many examples of media organizations and pundits forming an elitist mindset or culture, which leads them to look down on those they distribute information to. This leads into the same cycle of accountability as the government is victim to, and ultimately leads to an inflated sense of self-importance, which is all too evident in journalism today. If you pair that with a tendency to tribalism, you end up with an unaccountable media, portrayed as arbiters of truth, but ideologically driven to selectively choose what information they share with their followers, and sadly doing so with a complete approval of their moral conscience. And finally, with the advent of the modern world and the information age, tribes are forming all over the world through the internet. Cultures are indeed crossing borders. Along with that, the elitist culture that forms within journalism has had an opportunity to become globally homogenous, for the most part. A tribe with the same viewpoint, all seeing their ideology as superior to that of their followers due to the nature of their power. Now, when you combine a large government, tribalism, and a lack of access to accurate information, you get an unaccountable government. With unaccountability comes the most severe damage, because the elected officials who in a pious fashion create systems and laws to shape their society, not only do they create systems that are inefficient and destructive, but due to their unaccountability and their own ideologies, they will attribute the blame to someone or something else. And, after doing so, they will continue to push for their worldview and exert their power with barely a moment of reflection or modesty. The systems they create, being mostly unaccountable, cannot be managed properly. Their systems are not typically built on merit, and all the flaws, if revealed, are fixed with the same solution: more government, which compounds the mismanagement and the ever-expanding financial inefficiency. So, I know I've not put my thoughts across as best I could, but it has been very difficult for me to try and properly map them out in a clear manner. I've even written them out and I still don't feel like I've organized them the right way, and I feel like there's too much going on, which is where part of the issue comes in. Every aspect is intertwined with the others, so it's difficult to know where to start. There's so many variables at play, and I think that's part of the reason it seems so inevitable and partially hopeless. It's such a tangled mess that trying to untangle it just seems completely hopeless, completely futile. But I also know that this is the nature of the game. A stable society would likely be an awful one. Part of what makes democracy and capitalism so phenomenal is that they are chaotic. A never-ending war in which you do not murder your enemies and are challenged eternally by them. This is where accountability is meant to derive from. Those in power kept in check by their opposition, and all held accountable by those who put them in power. The people. I suspect the issue we've got now is that the biggest enemies are not that different. And that is something I do not see a solution to. That's about all I've got to say on it right now. I still need to try and figure out a whole bunch about it. I may be going down the wrong path entirely. But like I said, I've not given up. I still engage heavily and still enjoy laughing at SJWs. If you've got any of your own opinions or counterpoints to share, please do. Some of the things I've said, I'm like absolutely sure on. I know I've no doubt about it. Other things I'm kind of less certain about. I'm wondering if it's just a state of our own society, our own culture that we live in right now. Some of the things I'm saying seem like they are just universal, no matter where the time or place or culture or whatever, it's always going to happen. Other things might just be a circumstance of the current world we're in, the current culture we're in, and the current age we're in. But yeah, please do leave a comment down below if you've got anything to say. Don't really care if you like it or subscribe. Be appreciated, but it's completely up to you. Till the next video, whenever that may be, I'll see you guys in a year or two. Speak soon.